The 39 people found dead in a refrigerated lorry in Essex are believed to be Chinese nationals. Police are yet to confirm that and are still in the process of trying to identify the victims. Paramedics made the discovery shortly before 2 a.m. yesterday, sparking one of the UK's biggest murder inquiries. Police say the lorry's cabin came via Holyhead. Officers in Northern Ireland have raided 2 houses, and the National Crime Agency says it's working to identify organised crime groups who may have played a part. The lorry driver, Mo Robinson from County Armagh, has been arrested by Essex police on suspicion of murder. Meanwhile, prosecutors in Belgium have this morning announced that the trailer arrived in Zeebrugge on Tuesday afternoon. It then left the same day en route to the UK, arriving in Purfleet on the River Thames, where it then left the port shortly after 1 a.m. yesterday morning. 40 minutes later, paramedics arrived at the industrial estate in Grays to find the lorry containing the bodies. Our correspondent John Kay is in Grays and spoke to me earlier.
They've said it's going to be a long, complicated international process due to the nature of what has happened. This is the industrial estate where the lorry and the container were found yesterday morning, just on the little road there behind me. It's now been screened off by police. There's still a large police presence here. And the lorry's actually been taken away to Tilbury Docks, a couple of miles away. That is where that process is going on, that process of identification, the identification of 38 adults and 1 teenager, being done in Tilbury Docks, so it can be done in as much privacy and with as much dignity, the police say, as possible. And yet the police therefore not just working out who were these individuals, but where did they come from? How did they get into that refrigerator unit, and why? How were they being brought to the UK? There are so many questions, and the police stressing this is just the beginning of that investigation.
John Kay. Well, Richard Burnett is the Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association, and he says much more needs to be done to ensure security protection for vehicles across Europe.
I think there are lots of issues. You know, the root cause of the problem, you know, you're right in saying that we've seen this a lot over the last few years. The problem has never gone away. If you go back to the migrant crisis, you know, in Calais, in the jungle, the problem simply hasn't gone away. You know, drivers are facing attacks. You know, it's fair to say that the traffickers are upping their game in terms of how they're actually accessing and getting into vehicles and bringing migrants through. We're seeing changes there. But there's, you know, the root cause of the problem obviously is you know, the countries where these people are coming from, Eritrea, you know, Syria, those war-torn countries. And you know, is there enough being done globally to actually resolve those problems, to stop these people wanting to flee what's happening? But then, you know, the trafficking, there is simply not enough being done in terms of security, in terms of the protection of vehicles across Europe. We need to be working far more with the Europeans, but you know, there lies an issue in terms of Brexit. You know, how close we can influence, you know, some of the things that need to be done to try and stop these things from happening.
Well, let's pick up on that point now with Vernon Coker, the Labour MP and co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery. Mr Coker, thank you very much for talking to us today. What more do you think on that point needs to be done to step up security at various ports? Because we've heard since the discovery of the bodies yesterday that the level of security, the perceived level of security, varies greatly depending on which port you're talking about.
Well, I think that's the point. If you look at Calais, the security there has been increased quite considerably, as is the case at Dover, and similarly at other ports. And if you come across Europe, various security measures have been put in place. But clearly, because of that, as a consequence of that, the traffickers have then looked to other ports and other ways of trafficking people. And so we've seen the move. We're not quite sure where the people, the unfortunate people, were put into the container, but we've seen them moved across to into Zeebrugge and then brought across the channel into Purfleet. And clearly that means that we're going to have to look at that.
If the traffickers are playing cat and mouse with the authorities, could it not have been anticipated perhaps more that they would move away from those ports like Calais to other locations?
Well, one of the questions that needs to be answered is the National Crime Agency actually did in their latest report point out that this may be a consequence of improved security at some points and at some ports. And so I do think what the government will need to do is to have a summit with the National Crime Agency, with the border police and so on, and all of these different agencies, and then look at what is going on. And it's a bit of it must be in the light of this horror, it must be a wake-up call for us all to see what more can be done. But that's also at a national level, but clearly at an international level, we're going to have to talk to the Belgian government about what more needs to be done there in a bilateral sense. We're going to have to look at what Europol is doing, but also more broadly, if the reports are right as to where these unfortunate people have originated, what their nationality is, then clearly more broadly that international cooperation needs to be improved, and certainly we need to look to see what more can be done and do it.
As you've mentioned, we've been reporting that it's thought the victims were Chinese nationals. Based on your expertise in this area, does that give you any clues as to where they may have got on this lorry?
Well, in the light of what we've just been talking about, it's not totally clear, but certainly the intelligence that will be being gathered by the government and also with its international partners should identify where or give some clue as to where the overland route will be that's bringing these Chinese nationals across. And certainly we will need to as well to talk to the Chinese government about it. The latest statistics from the National Crime Agency do in fact show that the Chinese are the fourth largest contingent of people who are identified as potential victims of trafficking and modern slavery. So from that point of view, it's a further indication of where there's a particular problem and a particular source for the traffickers, and we need to look at that and try and understand what is happening with respect to that and do more about it.
Yes, whether response, the efforts might be need to be focused. The authorities rely, I understand, on what's called the National Referral Mechanism, the authorities here in the UK, yes, to try to understand how many people are suspected of being trafficked. But how much can you rely on that sort of data when, you know, perhaps what we've seen yesterday is the tip of the iceberg, just what has come to the public's attention?
Anita, that's the absolute correct phrase. It's the tip of the iceberg. There's no doubt about it. So the latest figures, even from these official figures for potential of trafficking and modern slavery, from 2017 to 2018, and 2018 are the latest full year statistics that we've got, show for adults a 36% increase and for children a 48% increase, which gives us a total of around 7,000. But there's many more than that. In 2013, the government estimated there were approximately 13,000. And we have to do better at identifying the victims and the potential victims, but also it's the confidence for these people to come forward when they are found. They're terrified of the traffickers. They're threatened. Their families are threatened back from in their source countries. If you don't cooperate with us, if you cooperate with the police, or if you run away, then we may not be able to find you, but we know where your family is. And they're terrified. And it is unbelievable. In our country in 2019, we are talking about people who are held in slavery and in bondage. It is astonishing that is taking place. And I think we need to look at what more we can do about this horrendous crime.
We, of course, don't know the exact nature of the story behind this, whether this was smuggling, trafficking. I'm not sure what differences you would draw between the two. But I was talking to a Syrian refugee earlier today who had been in the shoes of those people who were found in that lorry yesterday, who had himself spent time terrified in a lorry on his journey to the UK. He is now a refugee here. And I said to him, look, what drove you to do that? And he said he didn't really have a choice because of the circumstances at home. And he said that there was a lack of official, legal, proper routes to get into the UK. Now, that's a very political point, of course, but how do you respond to that argument?
Well, first of all, if I may, Anita, obviously smuggling and trafficking are very difficult because although they're both obviously illegal, smuggling is usually people consent to as opposed to trafficking where they haven't consented fairly obviously, or they've been deceived. But in terms of preventing it, in terms of that we need to look at how we prevent it. But he's right, or she's right, the Syrian person that you spoke to. We have to also to look at the safe and legal routes into the country, and we can only do that by international cooperation. But we also have to recognise that there is an issue with that. We can't just turn our backs on it and expect it to go away, because it won't. And this is a problem across Europe. We've seen a few years ago 1 million people come across the Mediterranean, fleeing poverty, but also fleeing war and persecution. Every single country in Europe is wrestling with this. It will only be resolved by countries working together, and that includes the United Kingdom. We've a proud record through our history of welcoming people who are fleeing persecution and seeking refuge, and we need to ensure that the current practice that we have meets that need. And the final thing is to say on that is we also need to understand that when we do find these people, that we give them some sort of immigration status, even when they're identified as victims of slavery. When they're actually said to be, that we know that you are a victim, their immigration status is still uncertain. And I think with respect to both that and also how we ensure that there are safe and proper routes for people to come here according to the law, I think that's something the government is going to have to look at in the light of what this dreadful incident that's occurred.
OK, Vernon Coker MP, thank you very much for your time. Co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group there on human trafficking and modern slavery.